Welcome back to Wellness with Delaney. Today I'm with Dr. Kelly McCann. She is from the Spring Center. She's a functional medicine doctor, and we are going to talk about all the ways that you can heal your body naturally and functionally. And this is going to be such a great episode. Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Delaney. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited for this convo. So, what is functional medicine and why is it different than allopathic medicine?
So, allopathic medicine is what we know as conventional medicine, right? These are MDs, DOs who have gone to medical school, and and then they can go on and be surgeons or specialists. And the difference between conventional medicine or allopathic medicine and functional medicine is that functional medicine is really interested in what's the root cause, what is beyond the label, right? If somebody has chronic fatigue syndrome, if somebody has fibromyalgia, those are just labels. They don't tell us what's really the root cause. And if you don't know the root cause, you can't really get better from it. One of the most aha moments that I had in my training was I recognized that in conventional medicine, we never ask why. What is it unique about this person, their genetics, their lifestyle, their choices, their history, that makes them more susceptible or less susceptible to getting this label? And when we recognize that that's not part of our training in conventional medicine, I can forgive a lot of my conventional colleagues for not having that root cause orientation to healing, because that's not how we're taught.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important to look at those causes so then it kind of shifts society from managing disease to being able to reverse and cure and prevent. So then with that, is functional the same thing as naturopathic medicine, or are there any key differences there?
So the primary differences with naturopathic medicine is that we're talking about a person who's gone to naturopathic medical school. So they are an ND as opposed to an MD, medical doctor or doctor of osteopathy. And I have many NDs who are, my favorite people on the planet. They're among my best friends. And the philosophy is really more in alignment with functional medicine, but they have their whole history of naturopathic medicine. And I think that functional medicine has co-opted a lot of naturopathic medicine without really giving credit where credit is due, perhaps. But that's a big difference. So many naturopaths would say, okay, I also practice functional medicine, or if you were having a conversation with a naturopath and a medical doctor, they have very similar orientations to healing. The naturopaths might have more tools in their toolkit, like they often learn homeopathy. Sometimes they'll learn acupuncture. They learn a lot more about herbs and how to use herbs in practice of medicine. So my naturopathic colleagues are much more skilled at some of those facets of functional medicine.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I see a lot of crossover, and then you hear, integrative, functional, naturopathic, and there's a lot of terms. I'm like, okay, there's obviously some differences, but I do see a lot of crossover and kind of collaboration with that. So I love that. Can you tell me a bit about the Spring Center, your clinic?
Sure. So I founded the Spring Center in 2008 in Newport Beach, Costa Mesa area, and in Orange County, California. And it's always been a functional medicine clinic. I started out doing what I would call integrative medicine, and that's really bringing together different perspectives. So I learned about acupuncture and nutrition, chiropractic, Ayurvedic, um, osteopathy. And so when I see a patient now as a functional medicine practitioner, I'm thinking about, well, how do I help them symptomatically? How do I help them feel better? Because that's why they're here, right? They feel terrible, they come to see me. Or they want to just optimize. But most of them don't feel well and they want to feel better.
Yeah.
And then how do I get to the root cause? What are the things that I can do? Do I need to send them to an acupuncturist or a body worker? Or, we're going to do additional labs and try and get to that root cause. So it's really about the clinic is geared towards helping pretty much anyone. I have a certification, a board certification as a pediatrician, and then as an internist, so I can see babies and young kids all the way up to, a couple of my eldest patients are in their 90s, and everyone in between. Um, and, you know, we see a lot of complex chronic illness, which means, oftentimes patients have a whole variety of symptoms. They might have a whole list of diagnoses, but nobody's ever really put it together for them as to what those root causes are and help them get better. I have a variety of patients who are pretty healthy and just want to stay healthy. They might have a family history of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and they want to optimize and make sure that, their parents or their grandparents' history does not become their history. And so that's something that functional medicine excels in as well. I have a nurse practitioner and a PA who work alongside me collaboratively, and we also offer IVs and immunotherapy at the clinic as well.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh, I wanna make the trip down just to see you. That sounds amazing. Okay, so you mentioned Ayurvedic medicine, and I'm really interested in this because I know that a lot of people hear Ayurveda and they're like, "Oh, woo-woo, spiritual," right? Like
Mhm.
they don't really see the scientific, the medical side of it. Can you share like what is Ayurvedic medicine? How does it work?
I can share a little bit. I have to say that's not an area of expertise, but it is the system of medicine that's usually practiced in India, and they have a whole host of concepts around nutrition and making sure that you're eating for your body type. There are three main body types, and and then there are ways to help like balance those body types. So some people are wiry and thin, and those body types oftentimes need more cooling foods, and so there's a real understanding of the differences between people and how to help support and balance that person with food, with nutrition, with supplements. And I think yoga is also part of Ayurveda as well. It's one of the limbs of Ayurveda, and yoga practice has obviously blossomed in the past 50 years in the United States. It used to be really woo-woo, and now you can have a yoga center on every corner, and that's fabulous to see. I think sometimes the spirituality of yoga is missing in some of the yoga studios that I've attended, but the spirituality is not for everyone. So if you just want to get a good workout, you can find a studio that's for you. And then if you want that deeper, connection and spiritual path, I think that there are plenty of places out there that you can tap into that as well.
Amazing. Okay, so let's get into the gut.
Okay.
Why does gut health matter?
Huge question, of course. Gut health matters because it is the center of our being, really. In order to make the engine go, we have to have the proper fuel, and we have to break down that fuel in a way that we can actually nourish our bodies and nourish ourselves. And if the gut doesn't work, really nothing else works very well. I mean, that's the truth of it, because our cells rely on our gut microbiome and the food that we put in our bodies in order to fuel our cells. So it's very foundational. The other thing that the gut is known for is it's two-thirds of the immune system is in the gastrointestinal system. So if we're having gut issues, we're going to be having immune system issues. If we have immune system issues, meaning like an autoimmune condition, allergies, asthma, oftentimes there's a gut connection. And then more recently, we've come to understand that there is a gut brain connection. And in fact, much of the information from the gut is going to the brain. More information from the gut is going to the brain than the brain to the gut, which means 90% of the serotonin that's made in the gastrointestinal system is impacting our brains and our mental health. The gut microbiome and how the gut microbiome metabolizes our food choices also impacts neurotransmitter production too. So if we don't eat well, if we have food sensitivities, if we have leaky gut, we're going to have immune system issues, nervous system issues, and we really have to start where the problem is beginning in the gastrointestinal tract.
Okay. And then what then would be some of the other like symptoms? I know like skin can be a component, things like that. Like if
Yes.
somebody looking at, their life, their state of health, how will they know if they might have gut distress?
Sure. So first order would be, of course, you have gas, you have bloating, you have diarrhea, you have constipation, you have heartburn. Sort of any GI symptoms would be the big, red flag. Okay, there's something wrong here. But yes, as you mentioned, skin is another common manifestation of gut issues. So sometimes people can have acne, they can have hives, they can have breakouts, and that's often related to the gastrointestinal system. And if we think about it, the skin is contiguous with the gut and the entire GI tract. So it kind of makes sense, right? Um, People can also get headaches. We talked about that gut brain connection. So people can have headaches, they can have migraines, they can have joint pain, they can just feel awful, they can have fatigue. I have had a number of patients over the years. I'll put them on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, and they don't really think that it's a problem until they've been off gluten or dairy for a while, and then they add it back in. They're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I got hit by a bus. I had no idea that these foods are really causing such inflammation and such impact on the body. So many symptoms can be related to your gut health.
Yeah, I feel like the gut is one of those things where it's like almost every system of the body, like if not every system of the body seems to be like a manifestation of gut health, which is so fascinating. It really is the center of so much. So what then are some of the biggest gut health offenders in our environment and lifestyle?
So you mean foods, or you want to talk about?
Anything, whatever you're like, what are you seeing when patients come in? They're like, okay, they have gut issues. What are the top offenders?
So it can be a whole variety of things. One one condition that I'm finding a lot more of is actually small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Are you
Mm,
familiar with that?
yeah, I've been hearing a lot of the girls are getting it.
Yes. It's not something you wanna get.
Yeah, no.
It's really not ideal. So, we know that there are, billions, if not trillions of organisms in the colon, but they're not supposed to be a lot of bacteria in the small intestine. And we can talk about why the bacteria is getting there, but suffice it to say, when there's bacteria in the small intestine, when you eat food that the bacteria then will ferment, it creates gas, and then that creates a whole host of symptoms. So oftentimes people will complain of bloating right after eating. They'll feel like they're pregnant because they're just so bloated. They may have diarrhea, constipation. They can pass gas, they can burp, they can have heartburn. So all of these symptoms can be related to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And the way that I think about it is, say for example, somebody is put on a acid blocker, like a proton pump inhibitor, or even an H2 blocker, although those are less problematic, or they just don't have enough acid, and they eat food, and they have this wonderful salad, but there's bacteria on the salad. There's bacteria in our food. I mean, that's how we get healthy gut microbiome, right? We eat fermented foods, we eat yogurt, we eat lots of things that are going to give us bacteria. But we want to kill off some of the bad guys. And if we don't have enough acid in our stomach, we could potentially end up with bacteria in our small intestine that just decide to hang out and have a party. So they set up housekeeping in the small intestine rather than making their way to the colon, and you're going to end up with symptoms. Other ways that this SIBO can happen, there can be backflow from the colon through the ileocecal valve into the lower part of the small intestine. And so then people can have symptoms that way. What I've been finding, unfortunately, is that the nervous system, which is supposed to clean the digestive tract with our peristalsis, may not be working properly, in part because we're all stressed out. So we think about the fact that when we are in a stress response, we're in a sympathetic response, we are not in, we're in fight or flight. Our options for our body is to divert all of the blood flow to our muscles so that we can run or fight, and it gets diverted away from the gastrointestinal tract. Because if we can't survive this threat, because the body thinks it might be something, life-threatening, right? But we can't survive this threat, who cares if we digest our food? Because we
Mm.
need to be able to survive. Unfortunately, the body can't really discern between the stress of having a paper due or being, presenting at a meeting or having a conversation with your boss or a fight with your boyfriend or your partner, and running away from a lion or a tiger, right? So the body has the same response, and we're all walking around stressed out of our minds most of the time. And so, therefore, we eat food. We're in the stress response, not the relaxation response. And our bodies literally can't digest that food.
Wow.
Yeah. And then on top of that, there is a janitorial system called the migrating motor complex that when we don't eat for at least 4 hours, the migrating motor complex will come through and like sweep everything out. But if we're eating, snacking every couple of hours, the janitorial staff doesn't kick in and we don't clean out the bacteria and the debris that's sitting there fermenting. So SIBO is a result of a variety of different things, and it's very difficult to manage and treat and then eradicate for good. So not only that, I'll let you ask more questions, but not only that, that oftentimes there's a root cause for some of these things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting because I think our society is really making a shift from like the snacking grazing culture to understanding that we need like micro fasts throughout the day. So we've really shifted from, when I was growing up, I remember there was this like grazing culture, right? Like the fitness and health people were really recommending that you eat like 5 snacks a day, like 5 or small meals a day instead of 3 big meals. And I've seen this shift in the past couple of years, even past couple of months, even more, of people really recognizing the benefits of this fasting. And it's really interesting that you're mentioning like that cleanup crew. It's important to be taking those micro fasts to really reset the gut and kind of let it chill out. And then something I'm really curious about. So I have a naturopath, and she was telling me, because we're friends outside of the medicine side. So we're
Nice.
having like a charcuterie night, and she was telling me a lot of people, obviously, you have your fruit plate, your charcuterie, and your bottle of wine. Let's say if you drink, and when you're eating fruit with the wine is actually like causing fermentation of that sugar. So does the combination of the foods you're eating together like affect whether or not you get that fermentation in your gut?
Um, Possibly. I mean, I think it's more about you're not going to have a problem if there aren't any bacteria there, right?
Okay.
It's really if the bacteria are in the small intestine, then they're going to ferment the foods. I mean, I have a number of patients who kind of only eat carnivore because they don't want to feed the bacteria. But if the colon is where all your bacteria are living and they're not in the small intestine, you should be able to have fruit and not have a problem. You're still going to have sugar spikes potentially, which may not be ideal, but it shouldn't be a problem for SIBO necessarily.
Gotcha. And then do you recommend eating fruit like last, like having whatever to like manage that blood sugar spike?
Well, I definitely think eating vegetables predominantly and animal protein is the best way to go at most meals. And then, yeah, you can add the fruit after, maybe have the fruit rather than a sugary dessert.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
So then
everybody
yeah.
likes sugar occasionally. So yeah, you gotta be smart about it.
Yeah, it's finding that balance for everyone, whatever that looks like. So then with people who are coming in, let's say they have like really bad acne or bloat or SIBO, is part of your regimen with them, like the protocol, going to be kind of mindfulness, anti-stress, since you mentioned that stress can be such a big contributor?
Yes, that's always a component. That's why I mentioned we want to symptomatically help people feel better, but we really want to get to the root cause and we want to make sure that they have the tools and skills and feel empowered to make those healthy changes for themselves. So if people come in with acne, bloating, um, potentially SIBO, we're going to do appropriate testing and then, institute some lifestyle changes. It may be a food sensitivity test on top of the SIBO test, or we might just start with the SIBO test and make some dietary suggestions. Usually, it's a low FODMAP diet. So, high FODMAPs foods are the foods that are most highly fermentable, um, including a lot of vegetables, otherwise healthy vegetables. But if they're feeding the growth of the bacteria, then we want to minimize them because we want to have them die, right?
Mhm.
So, and then I do use pharmaceuticals as well as supplements, and and then and then it's really looking about the root cause. So oftentimes when people come to see me, they've seen a dozen, 2 dozen, 2 dozen other doctors, and they've tried this protocol and that protocol and that protocol, and they're still dealing with many of the similar issues. And so in those folks, it's really about, okay, what is the thing that is preventing the body from healing? Because the body is is really smart, right? It's on our side. It is doing the best that it can to take care of us and to keep us as healthy as possible. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that fact. But if we think about the body that way, I think it's really helpful rather than having this antagonistic relationship with the body. So, for example, many of my patients have been exposed to mold and they don't know it. And mold and the mold toxins produced by the molds are neurotoxins. They disrupt the gut integrity. They disrupt the gut microbiome. They inflame the immune system. They can trigger allergies and autoimmune conditions, and they also interfere with the peristalsis. So if somebody is in a moldy building and they keep getting recurrent SIBO, or I should say, if they keep getting recurrent SIBO, the first thing that I think about is, are you in mold? Other things that put people at risk for recurrent SIBO would be chronic infections like Lyme disease or Bartonella. There are some people who have some structural issues who are more at risk for SIBO. So, for example, people who are hypermobile or who know that they have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. That's a connective tissue disorder that is genetic. So for those people who are like hyper flexible, bendy, or were when they were young, there may be a predisposition for having connective tissue issues and being more susceptible to mold, one, but also being more susceptible to gastroparesis and even a condition called mast cell activation, which I can talk about also if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to get into it. This is crazy. I did not know this about hyperflexible people. Growing up in the dance world, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy."
Yeah, yeah. So, um, I one of my specialties is mast cell activation syndrome, and what we're finding in many of our patients who present with this condition, which I'll explain in a second, but they also often have EDS or hypermobility, and oftentimes then we'll have autoimmune conditions and SIBO and um, gastroparesis, which is where the stomach doesn't move very well, and dysautonomias like POTS or postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. So um, I think there's something about that lax connective tissue that makes people more susceptible to these conditions. I don't know if it's literally the connective tissue is like this. And so there's room for mycotoxins to infiltrate. That's kind of what I see in my head anyway. But yeah, there's this constellation of symptoms that can show up in people. Now, not everyone who's hypermobile is going to have all these problems, or vice versa. But if somebody is hypermobile, they may want to be more conscientious of not putting themselves or signing a lease in a building that smells like mold, right? Not a good
Mhm.
idea.
Yeah.
So let me talk a little bit about mast cell. So mast cells, MAST, are immune cells. They are born in the bone marrow. They're related to our red and our white blood cells. They're born in the bone marrow, and they move to the periphery, and they line what I would call the areas of interface. So they're in our sinuses, they're in our mouth, and they're on our skin, they're in our entire GI tract. They line the blood-brain barrier. They hang out around our blood vessels and our nerves, and their job is to sound the alarm when they perceive a foreign invader or a threat. That's their job. They are filled with all these chemical messengers we call mediators, cytokines and chemokines and histamine and serotonin and enzymes. And those get released into the general vicinity where those mast cells perceive a threat, so that the rest of the immune system now can mobilize and come and deal with that threat. This is the normal response. This is how we, like, when we get a cut, things kind of get inflamed and red and swollen as it's healing, and then everything goes away. So everyone has mast cells. That's the job of the mast cells. What happens in these lucky people, which is about probably, I don't know, pre-COVID, it was 17% of the population. Post-COVID, I think it's probably more like 25% of the population. These people's mast cells get turned on so that they are hypervigilant and constantly surveilling the area for foreign invaders. And there are a lot of foreign invaders. Things that we're supposed to be able to tolerate, like our food, or dog dander, or the grass that we want to lie on while we're enjoying being outside. And then oftentimes it's being driven again by these big players: environmental chemicals, mold exposure, Lyme disease, chronic infections, chronic UTIs, etc.
Wow, this is so crazy. And because now that you're saying this, okay, so my mom, which I know she wouldn't care, she loves this podcast. I know she wouldn't care if I share her story, but she's hypermobile and has been since she was a little kid. She actually had an injury as a little kid, and her spine's been like super mobile ever since. Um, and after COVID, she had mast cell activation and has really dealt with that and has been like having to do a lot of work on her health in order to like manage symptoms. This is like putting a lot of pieces together. And then with all this, one thing that came to mind was like, is this specifically people who are like double jointed and mobile, like in their hips and spine, or could it be somebody who like becomes flexible because they work hard and stretch at a young age? Could you also see that issue rise for people who are like just honestly stretching a ton?
Not necessarily. Yeah. I mean, you can get mast cell without being hypermobile. I definitely have had my own issues, and there's no way that I'm hypermobile.
Okay.
So you don't have to be hypermobile in order to end up with mast cell. And hypermobility is a spectrum condition. There are, in terms of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there are, I think, 13 or 14 known genetic variants. I should say there are maybe 12, and then one of them is just the hypermobile type, which does not have a genetic variant kind of assigned to it. And there's still certain criteria that you have to meet in order to be labeled Ehlers-Danlos hypermobile type. And then there's hypermobile spectrum disorder, which your mom may fit into a little bit better. And I don't think that we have enough information
Mm.
about the statistics in terms of like what's the risk for somebody who is hypermobile, who just has hypermobile spectrum disorder to get mast cell activation versus somebody who has full-blown classical EDS. I
Mm,
don't think we know that
yeah.
information.
Yeah, that's always the interesting thing with wellness is I feel like it's always a moving target, and once you kind of unlock one answer or one correlation, then you have like a million more doors to unlock, which is so interesting. And it's great because there's always something to learn, but it can be so overwhelming, which is why I love people like you who are taking the time to learn it because there's so much out there. So I would love to get into the importance of customized approaches when it comes to medicine, and I know the root of a lot of that is lab work.
Mhm.
So why do you like recommend that people are finding out their lab work and finding out what all of their different biomarkers are?
You know, I can't imagine practicing medicine without using lab work. It would be virtually impossible. And, it's so interesting. Some of my patients will go to their primary care doctor and they order a complete blood panel and CBC. So they'll look at the white blood cells and the red blood cells and the platelets, and then they'll do a complete metabolic panel and they'll look at sodium and kidney function, liver function. They'll do a TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll get a vitamin D, and that's it. And they say, "Oh, you look fine."
Mhm.
You didn't ask any, like you didn't. Anyway, so I do a ton of blood work. I want to know what people's inflammatory markers are, as many as we can check. There's one called high sensitivity C-reactive protein or cardiac CRP, very important marker. And it's sensitive. So if people have an infection, it's going to be high. If they have an autoimmune condition, it may be high. It's not always high, but it really helps me understand the full picture of what's going on. I check things like uric acid, homocysteine, not just cholesterol, but the cholesterol fractionation, because I want to know a little bit more about the quality of your cholesterol. There are some oxidation markers that are readily available through Quest and LabCorp, like oxidized LDL. So, say somebody has a very high LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, right? But they're not oxidizing it. Well, is it that big of a deal? It tells me that there's an issue with the liver. It tells me that there's an issue with detox, perhaps, but it may not be that they need a statin right away, right? So we need to get as much information as possible to really contextualize what's going on. When my patients with mast cell activation come in, I check a tryptase, I check a histamine, chromogranin A. There's a bunch of urine tests that we can do if necessary that are a little bit more sophisticated and require send outs. I want to know their IgE level. IgE is the antibody immunoglobulin that's associated with allergy. Some of my mast cell patients have profound allergies, and that opens up another realm of potential therapeutics because they have a high IgE, for example. Um, and then that's just conventional testing, right? That's just taking your insurance and going to a conventional lab. There's a ton of things that we can do. And then when we talk about functional testing, we can do a deep dive. So ask me what you want, Delaney.
Yeah, well, before we dive into that, I do wanna ask, I mean, I love talking about cholesterol, like, super passionate about it, especially as I've been learning, like, there's a lot of misinformation that's been thrown at us around cholesterol. So, do you think the statins are overprescribed currently?
Yes. Yes, I do.
So, what happens? Like, what are some of the downsides of prescribing a statin to someone who really doesn't need it?
Well, it also blocks the enzyme that you're blocking also blocks the CoQ10 production,
Mm,
and CoQ10 is an important antioxidant, a molecule in the citric acid cycle and the creation of ATP. And so people often will get side effects from the statins, like elevated liver enzymes or muscle aches and pains and joint pains, because they are depleting their body's CoQ10 reserves. Um, and And not only that, when you lower the cholesterol, you lower the building blocks of all your other hormones, right? So cholesterol turns into pregnenolone, which then becomes progesterone or DHEA, and then it eventually becomes either your sex hormones from the DHEA and or cortisol, right? If you don't have enough hormones, I mean, if you don't have enough cholesterol, you can't make your hormones and you can't make your cortisol, which is critically important for life. So, and the body will preferentially make cortisol over your hormones. So, this is where a lot of people, I'll see them again with like chronic illness, mold exposure, lots of stress. They get adrenally deficient, and then their hormones are also tanked. But upstream, the body's like trying, it's desperate to make more cholesterol. And then, some well meaning cardiologist puts them on a statin, and it's just like, okay, the body is trying to do something. And remember, if we start with the idea that the body is really smart and it's trying to protect you, oftentimes that elevated cholesterol is because, it's kind of like mucus when you have a cold. It's trying to like give you more building blocks, to give you more um, material to help with the detox pathways. That's how I tend to see it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I actually literally I think I posted yesterday about the connection, between cholesterol and hormones, and I'm like, okay, it's so interesting how a lot of these doctors who are telling us to stop eating eggs and red meat are the ones who are slapping birth control on us when we have horrible, painful periods and our hormones aren't functioning properly. And I know for myself, when I started embracing more of an animal-based lifestyle, my periods got so much better. I'm not really having PMS anymore. They're more regular. And I feel like I'm actually like cycling the way I was meant to versus it used to be so irregular. It was insane. I've
Mhm.
even gone like months at a time without getting a period, just all of those things. So it's really fascinating to me where people do like really demonize cholesterol, and I still hear it today a lot, and I'm like, okay, we need to change this narrative because it isn't just how much cholesterol is in your body, it's the quality. And I think that's so important to have people like you who are looking at that and looking at the molecules. Okay, so tell me a little bit about functional lab work. What does that look like?
Okay. So functional lab work would be all those individual labs. There's a ton of them. Um, Genova, Doctor's Data. Um, there are, yeah, so just so many labs. And it really depends on what the person is coming in with. So, if we stick with the gut, I may want to, like I said, do a SIBO test. Now, I can send that person to an academic center. They can see a gastroenterologist in probably like 4 to 6 months. And the gastroenterologist will run all the tests except the SIBO test. And maybe in a year or so, you'll get to the SIBO test. So, not the best way to go when that's usually the first problem. So, luckily, there are a variety of different companies that have SIBO tests. That are breath tests that you can, I give them the kit, they take it home and they do it themselves. They're actually pretty accurate,
Yeah.
and they probably cost you, $150, $200. So they're not that expensive. And some insurances may even cover them. And there's a whole host of different companies that do that. So, and then we could do stool testing. We can do food sensitivity testing. I don't love food sensitivity testing, I will tell you. I've done all the different companies tests on myself, my patients. Sometimes they're actionable, sometimes they're not. Um, so it really depends on the person and what their budget is, what their level of interest is. Um, and then we do a lot of infection testing and mold toxin testing. So mold toxin testing or mycotoxin testing is a urine test, and it's looking at the body's ability to excrete those mold toxins if we suspect that they've been exposed to mold. Um, I use that test a great deal. It's not perfect, but it's very helpful, because here in Southern California, they don't build very well. And I've lived in 12 houses in Orange County, and they have all been moldy. to some
Wow.
extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's kinda same here in Western Washington because it's so wet all the time.
Yes.
Mold is so prevalent. In my last home, found black mold behind my bed, and it
Mhm.
was a lot, like, right behind the bed headboard because it was against the wall, and by the time I noticed it, I just happened to, like, pull the bed back to clean, and it had spread across, like, the whole headboard area. So I don't know how long I was sleeping with my head literally next to black mold, but then looking back, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I was anxious, I was fatigued, I was depressed, I had brain fog, I had acne." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I
Yes.
was sleeping next to black mold, like, this is crazy." And so that is really important. I wish that I had known about mycotoxin testing back then because I had no idea what was going on. Okay, so with the food sensitivity tests, I've heard theories. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I've heard theories and people say, like, if you're already reacting to something in your diet, you're gonna look off the charts on everything else because you're already inflamed, and then that can make the food test less accurate. Is there, like, merit to that, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably something like that. So, what most food sensitivity tests are looking at, not all of them, but most of them are looking at IgG. IgG is the memory immunoglobulin antibody, and and if we have increased intestinal permeability and we're eating the same foods all the time, then our immune systems are going to be presented with those food particles and we're going to make antibodies against those food particles. Um, so, is that really the food that's the driver, or is that the food that's the tag along because we have leaky gut? So, I think it makes it a little bit hard to utilize that information if everything is lighting up, right?
Mhm.
Common things are common, if people don't wanna pay for a food sensitivity test, well, let's do gluten-free, cow's milk, dairy-free, and sugar-free and kinda see see where we get from there. There are different technologies to do food sensitivity testing. I actually have a colleague who does food sensitivity testing that has been the most profoundly accurate that I've experienced. Um, at one point, I was living in a moldy house, and I had been gluten-free and dairy-free for a long time, and all of a sudden, I was getting really bloated and uncomfortable after meals, and so I did my own elimination diet, and I figured out all the foods that I was having reactions to almonds, peas, rice, oranges, apples, strawberries, tomatoes, corn, peanuts, soy, tomatoes. Did I say tomatoes? Tomatoes, peppers. And then I was telling my colleague about this, and he said, "Oh, well, we can do a food sensitivity test." And his technology got every single food I knew I had a problem with. It was
Wow.
pretty amazing.
That is really insane. So, really random question. So, if you're like already kind of reacting to mold, like you're living in this moldy house with something like peanuts, for instance, that is already kind of a high mold food, is that like going to contribute to your reactivity with foods like that?
It can. Yeah, it can. Not for everybody, but absolutely, it's a moldy food. Coffee can be really moldy, so
I
making
know.
sure that your coffee is not moldy. It may not be the caffeine that's making you jittery. It may be the mycotoxins that's making you
Mhm.
jittery. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research. Dairy can be moldy if the cow's grain is moldy and the cow eats the moldy grain and then has mycotoxins in the milk.
Yeah, which is a great case for grass-fed beef, everyone, honestly, for fresh,
Yes.
pasture-raised. Yeah, the coffee one. Coffee's a major contributor, and obviously not everybody knows about, like, mycotoxin tested coffee or low mold coffee. Do you have any that you recommend? Or I don't know if you're a coffee drinker actually, but
I am. I have to drink decaf, because genetically I don't metabolize caffeine very well, and it was interfering with my sleep. Um, so I actually love this coffee called Fabula coffee. Um, it's, like, organic, mold-free, and it tastes amazing. My staff and I did a coffee taste test last year, and I bought all these different kinds of coffee, and that was my favorite. So
oh, I love that. Okay, I'll have to check that out because I'm good about organic coffee, but I'm not always good about getting tested coffee, like, for mold. It's something that I know I need to be better about, especially like right now. I'm literally like parasite cleansing and doing all this stuff. I'm like, I really need to be good about getting mycotoxin free coffee. So I'll check it out. I'm excited to see, especially if it tastes really good. Because I feel like those coffees tend to be higher quality, anyways, attention to detail, anyways. So, kind of with customized medicine and all of this, supplements come into play. And I
Mhm.
think with the boom of wellness social media, it can be hard because you see influencers, let's say promoting a vitamin, and now everyone's going to get this vitamin, right? And we don't know, like, we don't actually know what we need unless we're actually doing the work. So, can you give me your 2 cents on this phenomenon?
Um, yeah, let's see. Okay, so I think it's important to recognize a couple different things um, that practitioners who are medical professionals have a lot more training in many areas, and also have the capacity to vet things because we understand the medical literature. Um, and so there is a big difference between professional line products and consumer-based products. And so consumer-based products would be anything that you can buy off Instagram or Amazon or at your local health food store. And then professional line products are products that you can only purchase through a professional. And typically they're higher quality. They often have more active ingredients in them. Um, I often find that a lot of the consumer-based products are what I call kitchen sink products. Let's put a little bit of everything, but nothing is a therapeutic amount, right?
Mhm.
So you've got a little bit of everything, and then you can say on the label, "Oh, well, this contains green tea and turmeric and ginger and resveratrol," but it's got little tiny dustings of these things that maybe will have a synergistic effect, but it's not necessarily a therapeutic effect that's supported by medical literature.
Mhm.
So I do think that it's important to recognize that there are definitely higher quality products, especially when we're talking about the realm of probiotics. I think this is important, so you go to like your local Whole Foods, no Whole Foods or another health food store, and they've got walls of probiotics. And as a consumer, what do you do, right? It's very confusing. Um, when you're looking at a professional line product, they have not just the genus and the species of the bacteria, but they also have the strain. And there will be a number, usually it's a combination of numbers and letters after the name of the bacteria. And you can actually take that and plug it into PubMed and look for the medical literature about that specific strain. And a lot of thought and decision making go into these combinations of probiotics that are put together when you're dealing with a professional line product, because some bacteria don't like to play nice with each other. So an an unknowing consumer product might just be throwing a bunch of things in there. They're not necessary. We don't necessarily know what strains they are, or if they play nice together, or maybe they have an antagonistic relationship. And on top of that, then oftentimes consumer products are guaranteed at manufacture,
Mhm.
because we're talking about live organisms, right? Live organisms that are hopefully going to replenish the good bacteria in the gut. They don't really do that, but they very often they provide information to the gut. But we want them to be alive. That's the whole purpose. Um, so if you buy something off the shelf, it's guaranteed at that manufacturing date. If you're taking it a couple of years later, chances are there's no live organisms in there. Whereas generally the professional line products are guaranteed at expiration
Mhm.
to have the number of billions of organisms in them that they say.
That's really important to know. Like, that's really important for people because, I mean, probiotics, and this is where it's tough because the supplement industry can get expensive, right? People are spending
So
money trying to do something good for themselves. And so it's like, okay, if you're spending this money, if that's in your budget, you want to make sure that the stuff you're taking is working and like doing what it says it does so that you're not just like throwing it down. And I know that I've heard people say like, well, dead probiotics are better than no probiotics as well. But I'm like, or at all. But I'm like, okay, but don't you still want them to have the maximum benefit? I know I do. Do you have any that you personally like and recommend?
Um, so I definitely think that there are, so oftentimes I'll use orthomolecular products, I'll use pure encapsulations. I think they do a very good job. Um, Integrative Therapeutics has a nice quality products, and they tend to be a little bit less expensive, which is good too. Zymogen has great products. One of my favorite little companies for probiotics in particular is one called Master Supplements and US Enzymes. They make some wonderful probiotics, as well as digestive enzymes. One of my favorite digestive enzymes is called Enzalase, and it actually has this wonderful quality that it helps you metabolize alcohol. So you can have it with, if you do drink alcohol on those rare occasions, it can also help you digest your food and metabolize the alcohol a little bit. So,
That's amazing.
um, yeah, that's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, if you're going to like take the burden off your liver a little bit, I recently started microdosing like raw organs, and one of them is pancreas. And I've noticed because obviously the digestive enzyme component with pancreas, I've noticed I will bring it to restaurants. I'm not even joking. And I put it on everything. And I'm like not getting bloated. Where I used to like if I ate out, especially because when you're out, you can't always control every ingredient that goes into your food.
Right.
And if I would always feel so bloated. And so then I started bringing it to restaurants and shamelessly putting it on my plate, on everyone else's plate. And I'm like, wait, I feel so good after eating. This is crazy. So digestive enzymes are such a life hack. It's absolutely insane.
I love that.
I'm so
Great.
shameless. I've literally like gone out with friends. I'm like, everyone's getting a sprinkling of raw pancreas, whether you want it or not. This is what we're doing. And everyone's like, okay, yeah, I do feel super good. Okay, so one thing before we run out of time that I would love to ask, because I know you've recently done a post on this and I thought it was so cool. What are some low effort, high yield wellness habits that people can adopt tomorrow into their daily lives?
Okay, so I think that some of the things I would suggest would be, when you get up in the morning, get morning light, go for a morning walk. I think that's super important. It helps set the circadian rhythm, it gets your body moving. I know for me, after lying in bed, I'm a little more stiff, so that movement is fantastic. Um, I'm a little geeky about sleep because I definitely struggle with sleep occasionally. And so making sure that your phone is, goes into night mode, your computer goes into night mode. I even have some really very goofy glasses that will fit over my glasses that are blue blockers. So the blue blockers that are clear are not going to cut it. They need to be amber colored. The darker, the better, in order to suppress the melatonin so that you can gradually be making melatonin even in the evenings and then be able to sleep more deeply. So those are some of my favorite things to do. Um, I don't know. What were some other things on the post? I forget.
Oh, there were so many. I think you talked about hydrating before caffeine. That was one of them. Why does that matter?
Well, caffeine, coffee, tea, it's a diuretic, right? And so it's going to make us urinate. So we want to make sure that we maintain our hydration status. And so drinking water is super important throughout the day, of course, but typically you want to hydrate before you're indulging in something that's going to dehydrate you.
Yeah, for sure. Do you recommend adding like minerals into water? If so, do you have any that you recommend?
Um, I do. Not everybody needs it. Many of my patients do need electrolytes, and so I use Body Bio brand products actually for electrolytes. I should have listed them in my list of all the supplements that I love. Um, they have something called Elite, super salty, but really clean. There's no sugar in it, there's no junk in it, and it's a liquid What I tend to do actually is just kind of do that like a shot, and then I'll just drink more water because it's very salty. And so it encourages you to drink more water. You can mix it if you really like that salty flavored water taste. Um, but great for staying hydrated, particularly when it's hot or when you go to a hot yoga class. I'll bring a little bottle with me and I'll just like sip on that and then chug some water. I think it's a great way to stay hydrated and keep your salts and electrolytes up. Um, oh, my other favorite thing that I have to talk about is phosphatidylcholine. Are you familiar with that, Delaney?
I've heard of it, but honestly, I don't know what it is, so I'm excited.
Okay, so phosphatidylcholine or phospholipids are the building blocks of every cell in the body. And we make it, but some people can have some genetic mutations where they don't make it quite as efficiently. There are multiple different ways to make it. Obviously, we have to make our building blocks for our cells. But if you've been exposed to environmental chemicals or mold and your toxins are sitting in your cells, so my pen is the toxin, my fingers are the cell, and you take phosphatidylcholine, guess what happens? It pulls out the toxin and heals the cell.
Amazing.
What? Yes, it's so cool. It's been used in Europe and Asia for decades. There's no toxic effects unless, of course, you take too much and you mobilize too many toxins, right? The other thing that's really cool about phosphatidylcholine is it's in the mucous membrane of the gastrointestinal tract. And so, particularly when people have SIBO or irritable bowel symptoms, food sensitivities, it's really great for helping to heal your gut. And it's not well talked about. I love phosphatidylcholine for brain health, for heart health. I give it to all my pregnant moms because the babies need that choline for their brain development. And I swear those babies are the smartest babies.
Okay,
When,
amazing.
yeah, it's a great life hack to know about phosphatidylcholine. And I would definitely say there are specific brands that I would recommend, Body Bio being the primary one.
Amazing. Okay, now I want to try this out. This sounds amazing. Is this something that you have to take with a binder, or is it like already good?
No, it's already good. You don't really have to take it with a binder.
Mm.
I mean, I think that binders are helpful, and yet they, the thing about binders is they don't go into the body, right? They just stay in the GI tract. So they're only going to bind things that make it to the GI tract. So
Mhm.
when we're talking about toxins in our cells, whether that's a mold toxin or pesticide or bisphenol or whatever it is, we have to get the toxin out of the cell. The binders don't get the toxin out of the cell. The phosphatidylcholine does.
Okay.
And then once the toxin is out of the cell, then you can take things like glutathione that are going to help grab those toxins in the extracellular matrix, escort them to the liver, the kidneys, or to your skin, where they can be flushed out either through
Mhm.
sweating, pooping, or peeing, right?
Amazing. Okay, I'm definitely going to be looking into this because it sounds like such a miraculous supplement to take. I'm quite excited to deep dive tonight. So, can you tell me, Dr. Kelly, what are your wellness goals?
My wellness goals. Well, I'm always striving for balance. Um, I work too much. I spend too much time in a chair working with patients in the clinic, or writing or trying to be creative and working on the business. And my goals would really be to find a better balance, to be able to have more time for exercise, for detoxing, biohacking, living, enjoying life. That's really my biggest goal.
I love that. Balance is so important. And it's always like you're promoting health in what you do. And of course, like the more you succeed in that and the more you're helping people, it can get so much harder to prioritize yourself. So I so know what you mean with just being that way. It can be hard to find balance for your own life. So that's a beautiful goal. So where can people find you and connect with you if they want to learn from you on social media or work with you, maybe if they're local?
Sure. So my clinic is in Orange County, California. The website is thespringcenter.com. I actually have medical licenses in about 12 different states. So I do have patients who see me from all over the country. If people fly in from Florida, New York, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Oregon, Washington. So it is possible to become a patient even if you don't live in California. We just required, we do require that people come in for the telehealth laws that you have to establish in California first, and then we can do a lot of our work via telemedicine. They can also find me. I have a separate website, drkellymccann.com, where I've got blogs, and you can find all my podcast interviews and other media, as well as I'm working on a course that will probably launch in the fall. And you can also find me at Dr. Kelly McCann on
Amazing.
Instagram.
Oh, amazing. I'll make sure to link your website in the show notes as well. So, you guys, if you're interested in checking out everything that Dr. Kelly has to say, whether you want to be a patient or learn from her, she has so many resources on the internet that are free for you to look at. I mean, her social media alone is so educational. Make sure you guys check her out. Let us know what you think of this episode. If you loved it, make sure to give us a 5-star review and tag Dr. Kelly as you share it in your stories. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will chat soon. Dr. Kelly, thank you so much.
Thank you, Delaney. Thanks, everyone.